Welcome to the Best in Slot podcast, a Warcraft podcast by the community for the community. I'm your main host, Sparty, and here with my co-host, Midgettes. Welcome. This is episode 21. Today we'll be talking about really the most recent Warcraft Q&A, specifically the Eon's statement about personal loot. That is the desired loot rule moving forward. Desired. Anyway, welcome. Hello, Midgettes. How are you this fine Sunday evening?
Doing great. It's quiet. It's snowing here, though. I was ready for spring, so I protest, but I think we still have some more snow here in Colorado.
Well, we've had really good weather here. Like, we've had, 16 degrees and sunny. It's been fantastic. And now, it was a little colder today, but Saturday was great. We went outside, and it was proper spring weather. It was really nice.
Yeah, it's been gorgeous here, but we snowed tonight, so I'm protesting. So I'll be cranky through the entire podcast. How's that go?
That's fine. Go have a, decaf coffee. You'll be better.
No, you don't want me to drink decaf.
Oh,
that would be a bad thing.
Well.
I turn into a goblin if you give me decaf.
Trias made coffee early today, and I got home, and I've been so tired. So I'm like, hey, is that coffee or decaf coffee in there? And she's like, oh, it's decaf. I'm like, Okay, so I poured out all of her coffee into a couple glasses, put that in the fridge, and made my own coffee.
Right? Make the real stuff. What's this decaf stuff?
Exactly. All right, so, welcome, guys. We're going to be talking about the Warcraft Q&A, but first, we need to start with the most important segment of this stream and this podcast, which is Sparty's dad joke of the week. My wife got me this awesome calendar of every single day there is an awesome dad joke, or just a joke in general. And some of the jokes are really bad, and some of them are actually friggin' hilarious. This one, so I'll choose the best joke of that week, and this one is really, I guess, from last week, technically this week, and I filtered out the best one for you guys. Are you guys ready for this one?
Well, no, I still want to discuss that they're best jokes, but yeah, go ahead. Let's see.
They are the best jokes, and for those of you, drinking coffee, you may want to swallow the coffee before you listen to this joke. You ready? Here it goes. Politicians and diapers have one thing in common. They should both be changed regularly, and for the same reason.
Okay, I like that one.
I knew you'd like that one.
I do
Borderline,
we don't want to go
politics,
like that one. That one's all right. But it didn't have a pun in it, so I don't think it qualifies as a dad joke.
Well, fine, whatever. I'll go through it. I'll get you a better dad joke next week. All right, so let's move on to segment number 2, which is what's new in the community. So it is, March 18th today? And something starting up tomorrow?
No, actually, it started up yesterday, which is Angoro Madness, and it's through March 19th. It ends tomorrow. So you go down and kill dinosaurs, and it's sort of a boring holiday. I don't get cute. I don't get cute little baby moonkins or anything like that. So it's not one of my
seasonal
favorites.
transmogs.
You go kill dinosaurs and you get some sort of buffs. That's about all there is to it. And you go down to for
those of us that are old gamers, Turok Dinosaur Hunter for the N64 many years ago. I'm sure people in stream chat here will totally agree. That was a good dinosaur game. I'm sure there's some more dinosaur games recently.
the micro holiday is definitely a micro holiday in Midget's book. But the big thing this week, and what everybody's been talking about, has been the WarcraftDevs Q&A. Did you see it?
I did not. I was busy in meetings all of, I think, Thursday, so I did not. I had to check a bit of the recap, some funny parts to that Q&A, and then, of course, I read it on the MMOChamp, the Cole's quick notes for Sparty, who doesn't have a ton of time. But it was interesting. Some interesting stuff. Some not surprising. And the not surprising stuff is the personal loot stuff for me personally, which is what we're going to be chatting about. Allied races, some things being staggered. What else? I don't know. What did you like from the Q&A?
I'm still working on you reading the quick notes. I didn't know you read. So let me ask you this, Sparty.
All right.
If you're reading Cliff's quick notes, for World of Warcraft, and you only read 1 out of every 10 words, what exactly do you get out of the Warcraft devs?
So Cool to Your Ass, personal loot, and communities they're basically one big Cool to Your Ass personal loot guild. That's how I put things together.
Not what you got out of the hour of Warcraft devs conversation.
Pretty much. I sort of skip words and skim it.
Well, at least you do it with big guys too.
Oh, for sure.
They did bring out, and it was loosely confirmed by Eon, that the Kul Tiran is going to be a confirmed allied race.
Well, yeah,
based
that's
on
been
the
data
fact
mined,
that
right?
it's been data mined.
Yeah,
I don't always believe data mines, though.
that's true.
I'm not sure I always believe the Warcraft devs because they changed their mind between now and live.
Oh, don't get me started.
But it does
Well,
look
maybe you will.
like it's going to be an alliance race, and we
Mm-hmm.
have at least seen that they're going to be druids and seen the druid form, which a lot of people really like. What did you look at it? What do you think?
I saw some of the models there. You know, the big fat human. I'm actually a little surprised there is going to be a druid model for them, but you know, we'll see how lore shapes up, and I don't know. You know, lore's made up on the spot all the time, and I'm sure they'll find some kind of loopholes for these weird, you know, navy people to, I guess, be seals or something in the water.
Well, it'll be curious if it's only druids or what they're doing with it, and but they don't have paladin. If they have paladin, are you going to switch?
Yeah, right. Like I'm gonna switch. Listen, the only time I would have ever switched races, and you're gonna appreciate this, the only time I would have ever switched races away from my amazing human body would have been a gnome paladin, because gnomes back in the day had an intellect bonus or a spell power bonus or whatever it was, and that would have been the only reason. But of course, gnomes can't reach the light, so gnomes could not be paladins.
Yeah, but we still have that intellect bonus over all of you, just so you know.
Well, you need it.
Whether
Moving
you
on.
see it or not. Hey, and one more thing on the lore. The interesting thing in what they talked about class balance and lore is they
Mm-hmm.
said a lot of class balance isn't going to necessarily be equal, but based more on the lore. It sounds like they're sort of going back to the more old vanilla school train of thought of bring the class for versus the player, which they sort of switched and they said that. So do you think we're going to end up back where paladins are just buff bots?
It's a good question. I don't think so. Back in the day, back in the RP days, right? Well, you would have to run a frost mage for Ragnaros because he's a fire god, elemental, whatever, right? So you couldn't really run fire mages. That's an interesting concept. I would imagine they're going to bring parts of it back, and maybe there'll be, you know, elemental immunities and, you know, some of that resist coming back. We'll see what happens in some of the later bosses. It's a huge developmental change to do that, but I think philosophically, it's an interesting one to do, where things are not balanced for the sake of balance. Of, you know, sometimes, and it's true in this situation now, where, you know, sometimes your one class can be amazing at AOE and great at single target other times, and it's going to vary. But to do it around lore, interesting. I'm very, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic as always with something like that being announced.
Well, here I'm, you know, I'm just cynical to not enough to not wonder if they're not just using that so that they have an excuse when the classes don't balance.
Oh, so they're just going to blame lore, right? Not the person, but
Blame
the
lore.
actual.
Exactly. Blame the lore. The lore didn't make it work.
Yeah, you know, listen, the lore says, you know, rogues are weaker now, right? Because there's so many damn pirates out there, so rogues are just saturated. I mean, however you want to say it.
I can't wait to meet Sneaky Pete. I'm sure we'll either
Oh
hate
my
him or
God.
love him. Hey, but the good news is for those of you who are doing the allied races, they're going to, every time they introduce an allied race, they will bring another slot so you don't have to worry about deleting your tunes. But they said that playing your alts or being as alt friendly in BFA is going to be about the same as Legion. So I don't know that I need any more slots. I haven't even finished all of my alts.
I know there's a lot of complaints going on right now of like Legion, alt friendly. I don't think so. And yeah, I mean, it's been like that. I don't know, World of Draenor, Legion, early on, it was a real pain in the ass to get your alts sort of up to speed, right? Partly through artifact knowledge and partly through everything else. And now they're in a much better place. Like I leveled my Hunter to 110, like I never level characters, and I did one AP quest, got Concordance, got everything, like filled up the entire artifact, and it was crazy. I'm like, oh, well, that's nice, and also it doesn't feel as awesome as it did when I was leveling the artifact trait or tree initially. I don't know. It's different.
Well, we'll see. You know, it's much quicker to get your artifact traits up, but I pulled out my other priest the other day, and she has 3 legendaries, and they're horrid. And so her competitiveness, if I was to go heal with you guys, she doesn't have Valence, and she doesn't have my cloak, and she doesn't have those best legendaries, and I still haven't seen them. So it makes it hard to get a tune up, get through all of the progressions, get all through the class halls. So when they say it's going to be about the same in BFA, I expect it to be just as challenging, even though the latter part of Legion has been much better than it was in the beginning. I couldn't even look at alts, but I've still got a few to go through.
Yeah, and I wonder if the whole reason for that really slow catch up with alts and the negativity towards it is around legendaries. And because legendaries aren't really coming back in the same format, right? You know, they're not. That should make the playing alts a lot more friendly, right? I mean, I'm sure there'll be rep grinds, and that's normal. That happens all the time, and people can bitch about rep grinds all they want and their alts and everything else. But that's normal. That happens every expansion, and that's where I agree with it. But I think if we removed legendaries in Legion, it would be much more alt friendly because the huge power scaling wouldn't be there. So maybe interesting.
Well, and it's something before you go on. It's something that's not just alts. Somebody quits playing and they come back and they're behind because they don't have those legendaries.
That's
so
true.
It's definitely made it hard for people to come back. We'll see what they do. You know, it's definitely something to do with feedback and things of that. The other thing, of course, and we've heard this before with 8.0, the traits on the artifact weapons will be disabled. The weapon and relics will stay, but not the talents. I'm still curious what they're going to do with the Hunter, BM Hunter Haiti, but past that, it looks like we're going to go back to regular weapon drops, including Warglaives.
Well, that's exciting. Exciting for the Demon Hunters, exciting for everybody else. I remember, that actually reminds me of the original Warcraft box art and like the RPG Gamer advertisements where you saw a Demon Hunter there fighting that dragon in Stranglethorn Vale. For those of you that remember that old screenshot, that red dragon, or the red drake rather. Yeah, that was, you know, interesting one. And yeah, Warglaives are back and we'll have weapons again. Of course, we're going to have Titan Forging, so fun times for the rogues looking for that Titan Forge dagger or whatever it is. But I mean, it'll be interesting, and I'm looking forward to the new systems which we're going to talk about shortly. What else? They mentioned what a unique trait of BFA is going to be that once the level cap is reached, the faction-specific zones become zones that are utilized by both factions. And did they really elaborate on how that's going to function, how that's going to work?
Well, they did, and because one of the complaints or concerns was you were actually making the world smaller, and you were going to have the Horde on one continent and the Alliance on another. And for leveling, you know, for me at least, I'm not the PvP fan, so that's probably my biggest hesitation to BFA. But that's not such a big deal. But it's a small world otherwise, so they've changed that, and I think it was their way of sort of addressing that while still maintaining the battle for Azereth premise, which is the PvP. But we'll see. They also talked about the communities, and I know thus far from what I've seen, but what are your thoughts on it?
You know, I thought the communities had so much more promise than this. I remember asking the question, you know, in front of the panel there, like, oh, this is going to be amazing. It's going to be this huge communication thing. You know, we could have a Holy Paladin community. We could have, you know, whatever we want. But they say it's going to be smaller than guilds, right? It should be smaller than guilds, or it's more for people to you know, to pug things together and do that kind of stuff of, you know, we're Sparty's little raiders or Midgettes' followers and friends, and it's a group of 5 or 6 friends, and we do know that, you know, having little communities within guilds, you know, may be disastrous or, you know, not the best place for things. But I'm disappointed rather with how it's going to work. That being said, though, you know, they do obviously announce a lot of things at BlizzCon, whether it be prime glyphs or garrisons being able to be moved around and that kind of stuff. And a lot of things do change in development. And I know this kind of stuff is what we've been looking for and asking for in terms of guild support and guild recruitment and really helping, you know, build the community, make it a better place. So I'm curious to see where it goes. Disappointing a little bit from the Q&A there, but again, we don't know all the details as for how communities will fully function.
Well, the one thing I took out of it is any of the new features for the communities will also be available in the guilds. So we'll see how it works. There's a lot of things that I know, especially with us having numerous alt guilds and sister guilds and all of these things, that we have a few more challenges, thank goodness for Greenwall. But I would like to see them come up with, I think in some ways they're trying to mimic what Discord has become to the community and put it within the game instead of it being a separate system. But I agree. That's where I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Better to use the Blizzard app, right? they'd rather have one big functioning app, whether it be that for voice, if anybody ever uses the voice stuff, similar to what Discord and all these other platforms, Slack, whatever else have been. So potentially, I mean, we'll see how it works. You know, and just to touch on an old topic, there's new allied races or new character slots for whenever there's new allied races. I mean, I have so many extra character slots, and I was looking at Sparty's bank the other day, and I have 10 legendaries that I can't use, like 10 different class legendaries, and they're just sitting in my bank doing nothing because I don't have any of these damn alts.
Yes,
I have
because you like to level so much.
Well, still, like I don't know, I have 3 characters at 110 now. That's pretty decent for Sparty, let me tell you.
That's a vast improvement, actually. We'll see what happens in BFA. I'm going to try out the allied races, but thus far, there's not a whole lot of appeal to leveling them all the way up to 110 and then 120, unless you're going for the transmog items. I know that there's a few that I want to try, but we'll see. I don't know. I'm sort of stuck with my gnomes. Unless they come out with the Volpera as a playable race, and then you may see some Volperas in Midgettes world.
I know a lot of the Blizzard devs are fans of the Volperas and where that's going. But the other stuff is the new Mythic Plus traits, right? So there's new Mythic Plus affixes rather coming. They're looking to bring down Fortified and Tyrannical to the earlier levels. So at Mythic, was it 4, Mythic 4, and Mythic 7, you get a different affix, and at 10, you get Tyrannical or Fortified, where they're looking to bring Fortified and Tyrannical back down to the mix of 4 and 7, and then add some new affixes to the 10s and higher, which will be interesting. I mean, it's exciting. We definitely do want change, and I would say the community wants change rather than the same affixes over and over and over. A new expansion is the time to do that, and I'm very excited to see how that plays out and how that's going to play out for the MDIs. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that with some potential later MDI guests, but we'll see.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is they did mention that the stuff that's been data mined so far, the devs haven't been happy with. So I would take the ones that you've seen so far and go, I don't think they're staying.
Well, they're trying different things out, right? And that's been clear. Some things may not stay. And we remember there were old affixes when they were initially trying them out in Legion and stuff. And some of them never made it to live, right? Some of them nowhere close. So we'll see.
Everything at this point is we'll see. But the big topic and the thing that I think really was part of conversation was Ian's statement that personal loot is the desired loot rule moving forward. And there was a lot of reaction. And I know we had some conversation on Zeros to Heroes Twitter, as well as your Twitter, Sparty, as far as the personal loot. And I want to jump into it.
Yeah, so let's dive right into it. And I could have sworn I had said this before. You know what? I might even go back to the original stream where it was myself, Towley, and Sloopbag, the Legendary Exposed. I'd have to check my notes from, 2 years ago. And this was actually a conversation that myself and Ian and it might have been Laura or some other dev had. And there was another player, the 4 of us. And of course, this was at the movie premiere or whatever it was. And this was, everyone had a couple drinks. And of course, loose lips. We're all chatting about, the systems. And they're like, yeah, they want to go personal loot down the line. And this was at the start of Legion, right? So this has been a long time coming. And I'm pretty sure I talked about this too. It's a long time coming that personal loot is the way to go. Personal loot is the way of the future. I would, put money down that this is going to change at some point. And now they're really just buttering us up for that system.
Well, and it could be. I don't know. I overall, personal loot, just as a theory, I like it. It's a lot easier and things. The one thing I hate, there's 2 things I hate. One is this add-on that came out with personal loot that said so-and-so has, and it's an up, and they don't need because it's not an upgrade.
The add-ons, yes.
And they can trade it with you. Well, no, I'm transmogging. Go away. I don't want to trade it. I got it. And then today I had somebody go, you need that? You don't need that. You're plenty geared. And he opened trade, and I was like, no. Even if I vendor this, you can't have it.
No, I want to vendor it for gold. Listen, there's okay, so onto your little thing. There's a difference between hey, I want it for transmog. Yeah, you know what? I don't need it. It's not an upgrade for me. You're right. but I would need it for a transmog piece, and I'm a transmog collector. I'm sorry, that's what I would like it for. Or I'm really short on gold. As much as I want to give this to you, I really need to vendor it for the 28 gold that it sells for. Whatever. I mean, maybe they'll give you 50 gold or 100 gold for the piece. Whatever it is, if they can trade you gold. But yeah, no, I get it. And it's a bit, well, if you open trade with 100 gold, then maybe. But no, I get it. It's a different attitude where people are like, hey, here, just they start tugging at your clothes, right? Like, hey, you don't need that. Can I have it, please? Give it to me.
No. So I run into that, and that's probably my only hesitation with it. Mm-hmm. But we had some really good conversation about it, and some of it was really interesting to see the various responses. And we actually invited Relo to come with us because he had some really good thoughts. But I thought maybe we could, talk about, I want to read the one thing he wrote was, I just fear that it'll end up where the guild takes every personal loot dropped item that's tradable and then distributes it just like they used to do.
We used to do this, yeah.
Split raids aren't going away either because you want to have multiple characters for more than gear reasons. So I thought...
Well, I guess we did found our Discord issue in that it does still cut out midgets, but that's okay. So...
No, I muted myself. I was talking and I muted myself.
That's okay.
That's right. A user error.
That's okay. So going to that, and before we touch on all those things, and people have great questions in chat here as well. Other loot systems in game over the past 13 years have gone the way of the dodo, right? Like there have been other loot systems in game. For those of you that don't remember them, they were removed entirely because partly people didn't use them, partly because they were really silly and unfair. And a lot of the loot systems have gone through a lot of different change through the Need Before Greed system and the round robin and how personal loot's been running and master loot, how that's been running because of various abuses or various changes. Back in the day, there was never a 80% guild thing for master loot, and that was a change because some players were abusing it. Some players were ninjaing all the items or ninjaing certain items and then, doing whatever they wanted. From a rating standpoint, right, and yes, we can talk about split raids in a sec, but from a rating and progression standpoint, a master loot or a guild assigned system is the best system for any kind of progression. And the reason for that is it allows you to decide where those resources, which is items and loot, should be best allocated. And typically, that's to your DPS players first, because that has the greatest outcome on any kind of encounter. When you increase your DPS, you're able to hit those DPS checks, killing adds, doing something at a certain time, and overall shortening the encounter so that there is less chance for catastrophe. That's why guilds typically give DPS gear first. Not always, but most of the time. With split raids, obviously split raids really exacerbated the problem since, I don't know, it's been happening since Wrath release, since whenever. It really came to a head back in Dragon Soul when Blood Legion and all these other teams, had these massive spreadsheets of, we're doing 5 split raids and we need all these tier pieces, and even the LFR pieces were really good because the 4 set bonuses were so good. And that really started this huge domino and snowball effect of like, well, now everybody's going to start doing split raids, and some guilds do them with only two teams, and other guilds do them with 5 different alts. But we sort of did that. Well, back in my day, guilds like mine are the reason why you have a Tuesday reset, because before it was considered an exploit, we used to cascade instances, and we can go through that a whole different time. And we would double our loot shares, right, in the same sort of time period that other guilds would do. So with loot funneling is, will this change? Will split raids go away with a personal loot change? The simple answer is no, right? The simple answer is absolutely not. Split raids will never, ever go away. Well, I'm sure they could put some things to sort of end them, but is it going to reduce drastically the use of split raids? I think so. It's not meant to limit them entirely. I think it's there to reduce them. But, we can listen to your thoughts on that as well.
Well, what I know, there's a couple of things, because let's just talk about the guild, the end of the raid tier mounts. Most guilds use those as a reward. So within this system, you take away that reward. One of the arguments they put out there is there won't be tier pieces in this next expansion. And so that's not going to be as necessary. I still say, you know, because the first thing that came out is all the healers say, oh, you mean we get gear now? No, you're still going to have to give it up to DPS, I promise.
Right? Well, that's the thing. Like, that's the worry that, you know, everyone sort of picks up their personal loot and it's an upgrade. Again, this is, if it's an upgrade for everybody else, you can trade it to them. If it's not an upgrade, or sorry, if it is an upgrade for you, then you can't trade it, obviously. The worry is that, yeah, you know, guilds will pick up all my loot, my hard-earned loot in this guild run, and then redistribute it to the DPS, right? And we did that years ago. Again, this only works if it is not an upgrade for you. Right? If items are upgrades for you as it goes, then they're an upgrade for you. You're gonna use them, right? It may not be a huge upgrade. It might be a 2% upgrade. That trinket might be better for a Shadow Priest than it is for a Warlock, and you're a Warlock. Sorry, you can't trade it. But that's the way it goes too, right? So.
Well, and my biggest concern, because I see it as, let's go back to that, it's not an upgrade for me. Okay. And if they put that on there where there is a baseline of it has to be a piece that isn't an upgrade. Well, here's the problem, especially in Legion. About half of my pieces are 860s or whatever. And the other half are up in 920s because of stats. We can go back and talk about, you know, all of the different trinkets and things of that nature. But we have another holy priest that comes in, and they're much more under geared, or it's a bigger upgrade for them. In most cases, I've not had a problem with, in most cases, there's always exceptions, but in most cases within a guild, I have not had a problem with the people who are going to be in for the next encounter getting the gear first, or the top DPS getting the gear first, or doing what's best for the raid. And that takes away the flexibility from the raid teams. I have zero problem with personal loot in LFR or in a pug raid, but I think within the guild environment, they're doing a disservice to the raid teams.
And that's a fair point. To touch on a couple things you mentioned, the mount, I would still see the mount as being a master loot. So despite it being a personal loot system, I would still sort of see the mount being a, I don't know, some weird system where it doesn't go to a random person, right? Right now, let's say you personal loot your mount from Fellhounds, right? The red, orange Charhound. Right. I would see it still as a system where, well, you still have to, you know, whoever is the mount looter or the master looter would still decide to give that one out, or it pops up on a roll or something. You know, that's something to be discussed. Leslie here had a really good point of, you know, if this is a system to punish just a few people, right, that's a poor reason. I don't think that's entirely the reason why. Part of it is, you know, as the game's older, and, you know, I'm sort of speaking for myself here too, it's less of a logistical nightmare to deal with all this crap, right? You know, if we're doing heroic progression for the very first time, right? So think of the situation where personal loot and this funneling may happen. You guys have just cleared normal and Taurus, right? You're the average guild clearing normal and Taurus, or Emerald Nightmare, or whatever it is. You've got your blues still, you've got your epics, and now you get into heroic. Well, guess what? A lot of those heroic, or most of those heroic pieces are going to be upgrades for you. Yeah, you can't funnel them, but you can't trade them anyway, right? So the thought of guilds picking up this loot and redistribute it is likely not going to happen. It's likely not going to be there. And somebody else here in stream, TBMJ Blaze, had another really good point of, well, if these guilds want to do 12 split raids, why not let them? Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. They're going to do however many split raids they want. If they want to do 12 hours of split raids, that's their prerogative. That's the point in their life where they're able to dedicate this time. Fine. I think it's really the trickle-down effect of these US 50 guilds, you know, US 40 guilds, whatever, which would be like a EU 100 guild. Those guys doing split raids as well. And I don't know, I've seen the value of split raids diminish, especially as we haven't done them. But again, we'll see what happens, right? It's an early discussion, and I'm sure there'll be lots of tweaking, but I'm very curious as to what other people think about these as well. Do you want to go through some of the Twitter comments?
Absolutely. But the one thing I do want to say is this is where the feedback comes in handy. And they even said to give the feedback on that they weren't, it was still in discussion. It was still on their minds. I look at things like, and we'll use Chi, who's a wonderful priest, and he's also a Mistweaver. If Chi and I were both in the raid, and it was a 2% upgrade for me, and I'm just the backup, but it was still an upgrade, and I couldn't trade it, but it was a much larger upgrade for him, and he's your main raider, it's really going to happen progression based on gear. So they have to change the entire gear system as we understand it right now for that concept to really work. Otherwise, all they're doing is they're punishing the guilds, in my opinion. But let's go on and read some of the tweets.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of really good compromises. I don't know if you actually captured it in our notes here. Somebody suggested we'll cap the personal loot trading at 5 item levels. So if it's within 5 item levels for you, you can trade it. But if it's a 10 item level upgrade, you can't trade it, right? And so that might help some of those compromises where the situation comes up where you just mentioned, right? Where it's a 2% upgrade for you, but a 15% upgrade for somebody else. That's a situation where it would still be applicable. But if it's a 20 item level upgrade for you, even though it's, a huge, massive boost for the other healer, well, it still wouldn't be tradable. So, I mean, there's different permutations of this loot system that may work, and this is where the feedback's appropriate. But yeah, let's go through some of the tweets here.
Why don't you start with the first one?
The first one. So the first one, like, I mentioned I really like this system. I would prefer it going forward, and I know personal loot is sort of the way of the future. And somebody asked, are you being sarcastic? I think it's a horrible idea. And my response was that, it's potential less issues between players, right? Yeah, there's always going to be issues. There's no perfect system out there, right? There's between DKP and Suicide Kings and personal loot and mass loot, there's never going to be a perfect system, right? There's always going to be issues with everything. Personally, I think it's fewer logistics for leaders, potentially, right? The caveat is, well, if personal loot is going to be tradable or whatever permutations there are, people are going to, abuse that system or funnel that loot. All the loot goes to Sparty, and then Sparty redistributes to everybody else, or the loot council redistributes to everybody else in a raid setting. There's hopefully less reliance on split raids, and of course split raids are going to be there, but hopefully it should taper them off a little bit. And I think Wakita here had the other good point where, so if a warlock gets a trinket, but it's horrible for them, and it's an item level upgrade for them, so it's technically an upgrade, right? Even though it's a really crappy trinket. It's an, on-use trinket that shoots daggers or something. But it's really good for Shadow Priest because it buffs some of their spells, but I can't trade it. That's a really silly system. That being said, you're right, but that's the nature of the RNG loot system, right? That's the way it goes. Sometimes you can go weeks and months without a High Fathers dropping, as my own guild. And other times you're getting so many Catalyst Injectors or so many Dragonspine trophies that people are buying them from your guild, right? That's the nature of RNG and loot in MMOs.
Well, the one thing I want to add to that I just sort of thought about while we were sitting here talking about it, I think it's going to prohibit people bringing in lower geared players, because they're going to, so right now they'll bring in lower guild players to increase the loot chances, but those players often come in knowing that unless the raid team doesn't need it or whatever. So I think that there's going to be, and I'm talking in this case about progression guilds. Let's differentiate between, because a lot of the teams now use personal loot within their raids and are perfectly happy about it. I'm talking about the people who are pushing for those top rankings and min-maxing. I think it's going to discourage them from bringing others. And there's a lot of people who got involved in raiding because they were brought along and got to see the big guys in action, so to speak. So they're going to have a lot of changes, I think, to what loot is for that to be flexible within a guild environment. I'm sort of against it.
Yeah, and no, that's a fair point. I was about to touch on something, but now I forgot because I was reading chat and I got distracted. Yeah, I mean, people are saying split rating only affects 2% of the population. That's fine. It's only going to affect 2%. Let them do whatever they want. The really good point, and I don't want to just have dead air here. And God, you guys made me forget my point. It was such a good one. It was something about loot councils and personal loot. I don't know. Keep talking. It'll come back to me.
Okay, well, let's go on to the other one, because there was, Tay said, I think if it's good if in a good guild and raid group. So talking about master loot, but I found pockets of cliques in raid groups that would share loot with themselves and not with everybody else.
Yeah, and that's, that's the thing, right? Like with master loot, that's why it's not a good system. If you don't have a good loot council, or if you don't have fairly unbiased people and people are giving loot to their girlfriend or their wife or their best friend or whoever, then that's why loot councils are really, really bad, right? It depends on the system. But I did remember my point now. Thank you. With personal loot systems, you're going to net more loot overall. So right now, what you touched on, sorry, the previous point was people bring in undergeared players. So Death Jesters, for instance, will do a heroic raid. We're going to bring in 30 players. We're going to bring in a bunch of alts, a bunch of, people's whatever characters, some friends of the guild, in order to maximize how much loot drops. For every 10 people in the raid, there's a higher percentage of tier dropping, or 10% chance, up to 30 people, so 3 pieces of tier dropping, sometimes for whatever. So in a given boss, God, we have it easy these days. 9 pieces of loot may drop, or 6, 7, 8 pieces of loot may drop from a boss. That's in a 30-person raid. If you're doing, let's say, a 30-person raid and it was all on personal loot, well, how much? Maybe you guys in chat here can throw out a number. How much loot would be worth it, right? So it's what, 25% more roughly on personal loot if 15 people from your 30-person raid got loot. Would that be a system that is more worthwhile? Would the downsides of of personal loot be made up for more loot in general, right? Your raid gets much more loot than a personal, or than a master loot system. I don't know. What do you think, Midgets? Is there a number, right, that...
Well, they tried motivating personal loot by already, because I believe there's increased loot chance drops in personal loot already. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't an incentive. So I think they would have to, it either has to be a bigger incentive. And if you remember back in the days of, 10-man raids versus 25-man, which is a whole other topic, mm-hmm. The 25-man had better loot, which is why they were able to do that. And as they've made these changes, there's been resistance, because it's like, well, wait a minute. How are we going to reward good players? How are we going to maximize our performance? And so it would have to be quite a change in either the loot itself, or, so for example, they've used examples of a best in slot trinket that's actually better for a shadow priest. Well, why is it on my loot table anyway? So they would need to make that kind of change, so that if it's really best in slot for the priest, it should be dropping for the priest, not for the warlock or whatever. And so I think they would have to put some weight systems in there. It'll be curious to see what they do. But with the loot as it stands, even if you took tier out without the tier bonuses, mm-hmm. So much weight is put on, like the trinkets, the best in slot trinkets especially, that if you have those, even if you got 15 pieces, let's say there's only 20, so you're in a heroic, you bring in 30, there's 20 in, your chances are that you're not getting them to the players that you need them to get to for a boss. You need a mm-hmm. specific trinket for that boss. And then you have to run, you're probably encouraging more runs, because you're going to have to be doing them on all the difficulties to try to find them and maybe get them Titan Forged or whatever they use mm-hmm. as the upgrade to get that trinket that you need for the next boss. Whereas, so I think they're taking away a lot of the flexibility to the guilds for progression.
Yeah, potentially. Somebody in chat made a point of, or was it you? I can't remember. Somebody made a point of, well, what's the point of bringing these undergeared players? Like, is it not to funnel loot to them? Well, yes and no. When we bring undergeared players, it's to give, actually, it's to increase more loot for the main raid team. But, you did say earlier, well, it's less incentive to bring an undergeared player, except if you're trying to gear that player. That gear player is going to get a ton of loot, because that loot system is more designed towards giving them loot, right?
Right. If you have, so for example, if you have Tally switch to another tank, mm-hmm. how are we going to get him geared up fast enough on this other tank? The good news is he won't have a bubble hearth. haha. But getting geared up fast enough with this current system. And I think those are the kinds of questions that we need to ask on a personal loot basis for the guilds, for the raiding teams. Because personal loot, when you're just pugging or you're out in a non-guild group, is understandable. It eliminates all of the ninja looting and all of that stuff. Within the guild environment, though, it's tough. And we've had a lot of challenges just between, you know, our guilds, because if they're in Little Heroes, it makes it a non-guild group, and then we have to switch people around. And we've had to do a lot of adjusting to be able to make sure that we could maintain that master loot. And I think that they're being narrow in their approach. They're trying to fix a larger problem, which is like LFR and public areas, but it's going to hamper the guild and the raid teams just at first glance.
Yeah, potentially. And like you say, you know, there's issues with the master loot system right now. So if I've got, you know, if there's multiple teams raiding together or multiple guilds raiding together in one team, you can't really do master loot, right? So what we have to do is, to maintain 80% of the raid as Death Jesters, is we temporarily tag. We tell people, hey, drop from Zeros to Heroes, I'm going to re-guild you into Death Jesters, and I'm going to re-invite you to the raid, and so we're going to have 80% of the raid as one guild, and then we'll re-guild you in your old guild afterwards, right? And so it's a bit of a workaround. So it's not the best system in that regard. You know, it was there to really help the community and prevent those ninja looters and prevent people from doing that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of work to be done with these systems, right? It's, you know, it's a long time coming, but it's also time for a lot of feedback, where if players do have, you know, these kind of feedbacks and these kind of situations, and the feedback should be more loot system oriented rather than personal issue oriented, of what if my players do this, or what if, you know, players do this. That's more of an issue of maybe that's the culture of the guild or the culture of the community, and part of that maybe does need to shift. But if there's issues with the system itself, right, and you mentioned a couple of really good ones of, well, why is this trinket dropping if it's not really good for me, right? Why should I be getting it? Maybe it should not be on the loot table. And there's been a couple of revisions to loot tables, you know, to add things or remove things from people. The funny one you mentioned was Tally, where, and I know Tally's done this, where he'll bring 25, 29 other druids, right? And if he's gearing up his bear, because Death Jesters needs a bear, well, he's going to say, hey guys, you know, stream, hit me up with all your gear. And so everyone just starts throwing gear at Tally. And that's great. You know, that's a great way for it to work. And maybe that's the way it's going to happen next time, right? With tier pieces being removed, and tier bonuses being removed, not tier pieces, the reliance of loot councils will be much smaller, and the big stuff will just be weapons and trinkets. Everything else will be, you know, small upgrades. So maybe the trinkets won't be as powerful. Maybe the weapons won't be as powerful. Who knows? Maybe that's the way they're going to have to combat this whole personal loot system.
Well, and I think a lot of it does boil down to, we're looking at the system we have now and saying, wait a minute, it's just not going to work. But Matt Gleave on your Twitter has sort of the same idea. He says, come on, Sparty, as a fellow Mythic raid lead, you can't be serious with this. All they're doing is taking control away from players. Now we're just going to end up with these insanely awkward situations where dealing out loot after a kill is going to take 20 minutes.
Potentially. You know, that's sort of the system we have now, though, right? When we try to funnel tier pieces, we pick up all the tier pieces and we distribute them right before the 2-hour timer expires. So we'll do a full clear of Heroic and Taurus, or we used to, and pick up all the tier pieces and say, okay, who's going to finish their 2 pieces, their 4 pieces, and we have these massive spreadsheets of like how big of an upgrade is it, you know, who's going to complete their 4-piece and 2-piece bonuses, is it going to go to rogues and mages first? It's no different. My hope is that with some of these personal loot systems, that it should speed up the process. That should be the overall goal, right? Combating split raids and all that other crap should not really be the focus. It should be, well, how can we make this easier and better for the player base, right? That should be the philosophy. Like, the philosophy whenever running a guild is, what is best for the guild? At the end of the day, what decision is best for the guild? Well, the decision here with personal loot should be what is best for the community, what is best for these raids and guilds, not the 1-2%, if that are doing split raids. That should not even be a consideration.
Well, and I don't know that necessarily split raids are what brought this on. I think it's more of, it was a community problem of like ninja looters, and there's a lot of people that do like the personal loot. But Matt Gleave went on to say one more thing, which I think is, because he's really about, you're taking away the choices from the players. And he said, we as a team killed the boss. The team should be able to decide where that loot goes. It shouldn't just randomly be thrown around. What are we trying to do? Make the experience even less team-based?
I mean, it's a good one, right? Is loot a consideration for team-based activities? I don't know. You know, years ago, I would completely agree. I would say, yeah, you know, you're right. We kill this as a team. We should decide who gets the shield and who gets the awesome stuff, because we should trust our loot council. And at the end of the day, if you can't trust your players, you should not be raiding with them, right? If there's an issue with the loot council, if you don't trust those guys, you're in the wrong guild. So, you know, you've done it as a team. Should you? I don't know. Yes and no. Part of casual crafts party is saying, well, I'm done with giving out loot. I'm done with all this stuff. I don't have time for dealing with all these other little loot things, and it's a 15% upgrade for this player, but it's a 5% upgrade for this player, but the 5% upgrade player is much better than 50% guy. Who do we give it to? This person's been around longer. I'm happy to be done with a lot of those situations too, and a lot of those issues, and that's where I would hope that the direction is, and that's the philosophy that Blizzard wants to take, is let's take some of this work off those guys, and let's just, you know, loot is loot. It's going to come to everybody. It's no longer the days of you're in a 40-person loot, a 40-person raid, and Molten Core or a Nixie or a Black and Glare or whatever, but only 2 pieces of loot are dropping. 3 if you're lucky, right? That was when we had major loot issues. But these days, loot is raining from the skies, right? Almost literally. It should be. There's so much loot, right? I don't think we should be putting that much focus into it, but people have some really fair points of, well, we want to control where it goes, right? We want to control, you know, who we reward, whether it be mounts or, you know, weapons or whatever. We want to make sure our team is as good as possible. Don't take that control away from us. I would agree. I mean, those are some good situations and good suggestions, but, you know, let's give that feedback where it's appropriate.
Well, that's what I was going to just suggest. So, taking into consideration that when it comes to personal loot, that you would like to be done with the, you know, 20 minutes of discussing, well, who gets what tier piece and keeping loot spreadsheets and all of the other things that you guys have to do to keep track of the loot and who got what piece this day. How would you present the concept of personal loot while still, what would be your suggestions to make the personal loot more appealing on a progression level, and or how would you give the feedback to the Warcraft devs of what you would like to see? Because there is a lot of work in a loot council.
Yeah, no, there is. I just was reading one of the stream chat comments there of just move everything to a token system where your players can buy the loot they need. So first of all, that system, I mean, it's interesting and funny. It removes the RNG and sort of the fun component of loot, in my opinion. It brings it sort of into a currency system, and if you're going to do currency system, you may as well do pay-to-play loot boxes, because that is obviously the most effective system out there, right? You know, throw gold at the problem.
Or go back to Valor points, you know?
I know, or Valor. Yeah, don't we miss Valor?
No, not at all.
In that, I completely lost your question. What was your question? Suggestions? How to give feedback? Was that what it was?
Well, it was, how would you take a personal loot system and make it more amicable to a mythic raid leader?
I'm not sure. You know, I can give feedback on what I think will work or what I think will not work. I think a personal loot system would work with lots of different, you know, ifs and thens, but you don't want to overcomplicate the system, right? You know, Master Loot is currently, as long as 80% of the raid is of one guild, then you can use Master Loot and, you know, trade it however you want, right? One person can give it away. With a personal loot system, if you put too many complicated things into it, of you can only trade items if they're within 5 item levels, or weapons if they're within 10, or, you know, if this character's only been on for 30 days, whatever. It overcomplicates things too much. You want to keep it relatively simple. You want to make sure it's easy for players to use and it's relatively fair for players to use. There will always be issues, right? So even if we had this perfect loot system and you midgets got into a raid and you're doing an LFR, you know, you're a mythic raider, but you went into an LFR and you know, a piece drops for you in personal loot, but the stupid add-on says, hey, this item's not an upgrade for Midgettes. She can trade it to anybody. And of course, you have that player, like you mentioned earlier in this podcast, that opens trade with you. Hey, you don't need that. You're a Mythic Raider. Can I have it, please? And starts tugging at your shoes because they want your brand new shoes, but you want them for transmog. Those kind of issues will always be there. Those kind of, community issues or human issues will always be there. Will any system fix it? Probably not. I don't know. Just equip them and say, these are my new transmog shoes. Sorry, you can't have them. Pry them off my cold, dead feet.
Right? Well, and for those who know me, all I can think is, no, you can't have it. Matter of fact, if I can log off before they can ask, oh, good, I got it on the inbox. I got to get out of here quick. But I think part of it is we don't know exactly what the new system is. Yep. And I think this is going to be a really good topic to add your feedback. But before we get to the feedback, I want to cover one more. I had one of the people who responded to us. I said, what do you think about the concept of personal loot being the way to go? And Tovarish said, love it. Takes away people funneling loot to players who probably don't need it. Example, trying for Warforged or Titanforge versus people who actually need it. Huge eye level increase. That's why I love it. And is that maybe what Blizzard's trying to respond to?
Maybe, and a lot of the philosophies that Blizzard has, for instance, I've always been for Titan forging for the same reason Blizzard has. Yeah, there's a lot of issues for it, but if I'm doing, as a Mythic Raider, a normal raid or a heroic raid, and there's a chance for me to get a reward, besides the altruism that that I'm doing to help out my friends, if there's a chance for me to get an upgrade, sure, that's awesome, I'll do it, right? And that should be the philosophy that anytime you're doing content, you're doing stuff, there is a tiny lottery chance you could get an upgrade. And from that philosophy I do like. Well, with loot, right? Maybe it's the same thing that Tovar says here, right? They're trying to, take away some of the loot funneling away from people that don't need it to people that do need it. And again, comes down to, well, what is best for the game? What is best for our teams and our guilds and our raids, right? Obviously, the Warcraft devs do care and they do play this game. For instance, I can't remember which dev it was that was on Twitter, but he finally finished every single artifact appearance for all characters and all specs and all classes, which was amazing. I think, was it 36 of them total? And funnily enough, the first tweet, or one of the best responses, was from Brian Holinka, who said, hey, do you even play this game, in quotation marks, because people always ask the devs, do you guys even play this game? Do you even know what you're talking about? And yeah, obviously they do, right? And obviously they deal with a lot of the same issues, right? A lot of the same developers, the ones that I talk to, whether it be at BlizzCon or wherever else, they're the same ones raiding in those mythic guilds or those heroic guilds or those normal guilds or LFRs. And they're dealing with the exact same issues that a lot of our viewers are.
Agreed. And a great question from the Q&A came, and I think this is where we start wrapping it up, is how could players communicate their suggestions to the developer team?
It's a good one. And I obviously said, Snapchat. Well, no, don't Snapchat. Don't send pictures of buttholes to the developers. Really, it's rational feedback, right? It's rational feedback better than charged emotional feedback of like, this sucks, I hate this, right? Like, that's partly emotional feedback, right? But part of it is they don't need these long ass essays, because who has time to read all that stuff, even if it has all the math behind it, right? A good point of feedback is not, when are you going to fix rets? Well, rets are actually in a really fun place in BFA, but that's not helpful. Like, when are you going to fix warlocks or whatever? It doesn't matter. Right? That's not good feedback of, well, if you don't like rets right now, what specifically do you not like about them? Or, it's showing numbers or showing logs specifically. Don't just say, hey, look, rets are in a bad place, and you link your ret log where you're doing really poorly because you're under geared and you don't know how to play a ret. Like, oh, look, rets suck, buff them. Maybe the issue isn't rets, maybe the issue is you, and you need to practice your ret rotation. When you're giving feedback to developers, again, personal loot stuff that's really valuable right now, don't try to convince them that everyone hates something. Everybody, the entire community hates this. Well, clearly not. I mean, everyone has different opinions. Clearly, I have different opinions than a lot of viewers here, or even midgets, right? Hyperboles get you nowhere. So, and hyperboles are really gross exaggerations of I'm representing the entire community when I say this, or even a majority of the community. Well, no, you're just representing yourself. That is the only opinion you are representing right now. Things that do help, well, data, screenshots, logs, specific locations, right? What don't you like about this? This rotation feels really clunky. There's too much downtime waiting for the abilities to pop up. Oh, okay, well, what's your haste at, for instance, right? Those are that kind of feedback that is important. That's where the feedback is really, really relevant. Again, that reasonable response feedback rather than the emotional response feedback, that's also really relevant, right? Some of the developers, Sigma, you guys will know him as Hamlet. He's a huge mathematician. He's the one that sort of helps tweak those knobs, and well, Rets only need a 1.4% buff because this is the reason why the math supports it, right? And Warlocks need to be nerfed 5% because their dots are or whatever, right? And that's, again, some of the numbers that support it. He's the big mathematician, or one of the big mathematicians on that team. The player feedback itself depends on what the feedback is, right? So forums, if you have lists of feedback, Twitter for pictures of things, report bugs in game, obviously, or whatever else is. But a lot of it does get back to the team, and the community managers are really good on relaying a lot of the information because they're going through Reddit, and they're going through Twitter, and they're going through everything else, and obviously sorting through some of the hate mail, which we're going to touch on soon, and relaying it back to the actual dev team, right? Whether it be the class dev team or the raid encounter teams or the bug teams or whatever else it is. So give that feedback where it's appropriate. And again, there's a lot of passionate responses of, regarding personal loot. Throw that feedback back to the devs. They want to hear it. You deserve to be heard. You guys as players are paying your $15 a month. You deserve to help shape the direction of the game. And sorry, the customer isn't always right, but I guarantee they will listen, even if they don't agree.
Well, and it's a lot better, and I didn't know if you were going to bring this up, but Brett Forbes, which is one of the community managers.
Ornix, yeah. He's a great guy.
He's a wonderful guy. And he did a tweet, and he said, I've been pretty lucky in my life to always have a thick skin, even after constant bullying and harassment growing up. And I know this doesn't represent a majority of our community, but as a note, this kind of stuff doesn't help whatever cause you apparently think I'm against. And then he showed some horrible tweets that he had received or comments. And they're not going to listen to that. And as another human being, they don't deserve this kind of treatment. I can't even read these tweets out loud because they're that horrible. And as a community, when we see things like this, I hope we just turn and walk away, tell them they're horrible, tell those people that they shouldn't be making those kind of tweets, because this is what we have. Such a wonderful Warcraft community where they communicate with us, and the abuse and harassment they take because people feel passionately about something is very sad. And it's only from some, it's not from the majority of the community. But when you see it, shut it down, say something. We're going to continue to highlight things like this because they're just horrid. And I will link in chat here momentarily Brett's tweet. Your thoughts, Sparty?
Yeah, and part of that comes back to the whole toxicity in the community aspect, right? I mean, he didn't really name these guys, but at the same time, this is where you stand up for your fellow Warcraft player, your Warcraft, community manager. These guys, deal with this shit on a daily basis, right? And I remember a lot of the, if you guys remember Zarim, if you guys remember a lot of Bashok, they were really, really good CMs, and I've got to meet them in real life a bunch of times, and they would complain about the same kind of stuff too. It happens all the time. It happens to Laura. It happens to Halinka. People are really passionate about their game, and they love it, and that's great, right? That's great that Warcraft has made such an impact on players, but at the same time, there's humans behind that screen, and nobody would ever want to be treated in such a way or get some of those comments. I don't know who Alex Sensual is or whatever, and talking more about Classic and, slit your throat, and none of these comments are appropriate. So I think at the end of the day, we as a community need to, stand up and help defend our fellow player from bullying or from this harassment or from everything else. Because, if we see it, whether it be in our own communities, targeting some of these guys, we should stand up for them and let people know it's not okay.
Okay.
And I think that's it. We're gonna wrap there for tonight's 21st episode. That was a good one. That was a bit of a longer one than I thought it would be. But with that, let's wrap it up. Again, we did a bunch of round of Buddy Birds this past week. For those of you, I think we did like 5 or 6 people, at least in our most recent heroic run. Hashtag Buddy Birds for those of you that want to come along. Or nominate somebody to get it done. If you guys have suggestions, questions, people you want to see on the show, we've reached out to a few people. We're waiting to hear back, because we'd like to have a guest every 2-3 weeks on the show. It's always great to get other opinions, and obviously would have loved to get some more here regarding the personal loot issue. But if you guys have any questions, feedback, whatever, bestinslotpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening, watching. Have a good night. Be excellent to each other, and as always, live your life heroically.